We're talking Josh Van versus Brandon Royval. UFC 317 just wrapped up last weekend. There are no UFC events this weekend, so I've had the week to kind of process everything and to kind of look back at the fights, look and see what people are saying out there in the world of MMA social media. A lot going on, a lot of implications after this fight. And so we're going to be talking that the fight itself, Joshua Van, the victor in a well-deserved win. Brandon Royval, just a spirited effort, man. He just gave everything he had in that fight. Are there some things he could have done differently, though, to possibly change the outcome of that fight? And then now, we have Joshua Van zooming like a rocket ship to the top in the anticipated and perceived next fight against the champion Alexandre Pantoja. So we're going to talk about all that, guys. But man, what a great fight, right? Definitely fight of the year candidate. It's going to be hard to top. I mean, I see that one still being there come December, right, as a standing candidate for fight of the year. But man, just both guys just giving it everything they had. They just threw out the playbook, threw out everything, and just say, hey, we're going to go nose to nose, toe to toe, and just duke it out, and see who's the last man standing. And it was Joshua Van's night, right? He was able to do what he does, right? I mean, he was able to play his game, and I don't want to say necessarily dictate the terms. It was a bit of a back and forth affair, but this was a style of fight where Josh Van feels most comfortable. Right? And this was said kind of at the press conference too. I mean, there's not a whole lot of trash talk, but even Brandon Royval made it pretty clear that, hey, me and Josh Van, we're going to put on a show. We're gonna get going there and duke it out with these, right? And that's exactly what they did. Now, was that the smartest game plan from a Brandon Royval? Let's talk about that a little bit. We get into round one. And Brandon Royval is doing what he typically does, the distance striking, right? Just the volume strikes. He's not a guy that has a ton of one punch knockout power, but he was doing what he does. Popping that jab, striking from distance, right? Not anything devastating necessarily, but we know with these volume guys that these points can add up, and it can be a path to victory in certain circumstances, but. Josh Van didn't hang around and just play that game for too long. He continued to try to close distance, get into that close boxing range, and then, he fired back pretty quick. And I do have the stats pulled up here, which is interesting when I took a little bit closer look at these stats, because in this fight, round one, was given to Josh Van on all three of the judges' scorecards. And he landed 52 of 79 at a 65% clip. So really good ratio right there. 65%. Brandon Royval definitely popped off more, 116 attempted, but only 42 landed at a 36% clip. No takedowns attempted by either guy for any of the fight, right? But, Josh Van, what I really liked about Josh Van in that first round is he didn't just, sometimes, especially with these younger fighters, they get in this habit of just kind of going through this feeling out process for too long. And, in a 3-round fight, that can be very dangerous. And I say it all the time, you cannot give rounds away. Even if you are trying to kind of go through this feeling out process, particularly when these guys are like these strikers, primarily boxers, they can take a while. It's one of the things that sometimes, as much of a fan as I am of him, can drive me crazy about Petr Yan. I love Petr Yan, but sometimes he does take a while to kind of get that engine revved up and get cooking. And I know sometimes he's downloading, he's processing, he's waiting, but it's just such a dangerous game to play. Joshua Van did not do that, though. He closed distance. He did not let Brandon Royval control the distance. He did initially probably the first minute or so, but after that, man, he was right up on him and said, okay, I'm going to start firing back. And he was able to outland him in that first round, 52 to 42, significant strike difference. But, visually, I think it did look a lot closer than what it was in that first round. Even that first round, I scored it for Van, but it was quite a bit of back and forth. And I do recall Josh landed the heavier shots, but with the output, even when he's not landing clean, it's sometimes judges will award the guy with more output, right? Unless there's something just crazy, devastating in the round, which, there really wasn't. Both guys, landed some good shots, but Josh Van did take that round on all three of the judges' scorecards, and so both guys kind of got off to a good start. Round one, it was like, man, it was just kind of like, you're throwing the, you're getting the fire sparked up, right? And you're just anticipating this, big fire to start. And then, in round two, both guys just started cooking. Brandon Royval kind of rescued himself a bit in that second round. He outlanded him 87 to 74, significant strikes. And let's see here. I wanted to take a look at some of the other striking as well. The leg kicks, a lot of guys haven't talked about this a lot, but we're going to talk about some of these leg kicks too that really both guys implemented. But Brandon Royval, like I mentioned, he rescued himself in that second round. He outlanded him. I did see some guys on social media saying that was Joshua Van's best round, and I'm not sure about that. Two of the three judges gave round two for Brandon Royval. And when I was watching that in real time, I kind of thought that, Brandon Royval took that round. He landed some good shots. He was 7 for 7 to the body, 3 or 4 legs, and technically the numbers say that he did outland him, 87 to 174. But again, just the back and forth, it's just like, hey, you get one, I'm going to get one back, right? Just boom, 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 right? Both guys. And then I love just the equal distribution of damage, right? I mean, both guys were primarily head hunting, but you got to like the distribution to different areas of the body. Round two, Royval 7 of 7 to the body, Josh Van 18 of 19 to the body, and then leg kicks 3 of 4 for Royval, 6 of 6 for Joshua Van. And so, it seemed to be, as I was looking at on X and social media, that most people it was the consensus that whoever takes this third round is going to be the victor, right? And so we get into round three, and I'm thinking, okay, there's a lot at stake for both guys, but it's really hard to argue that there wasn't more at stake for Brandon Royval, because he's the number one contender going into this fight. If he loses his number one contender ranking. He's already had a shot at the champion Alexandre Pantoja. Didn't go in his favor. Pretty well outclassed in that fight, and so he really, really needed this win. And sometimes, you got to kind of throw out the idea of just catering to the crowd, catering to the fans. Hey, we're going to put on a show, Hey, and that's all good and well, and it seemed to work out for him pretty well financially. I know both guys got their show and win money, I believe, and so, which well deserved, right? I mean, you got to tip your cap to both guys for putting on just this amazing show for us. But I did think that going into round three, I did think we would have started to see Brandon Royval implement some of those other pieces of his game, or at least attempt to, because it's hard to argue that the heavier hands don't belong to Joshua Van. He's not a guy that has crazy one-shot knockout power that we've seen so far. And, before you guys go in there and bite my head off, please allow me to explain. And that's not to say that he doesn't carry power. He's got some heavy hands. He carries power in those shots, but he's a guy that will wear you down with a volume, but he's not necessarily a volume striker the same way Royval is, right? He's got a little more pop to his shots. But even in the Bulldog Silva fight, he did finish Bulldog Silva, but it was a cumulative, steady beat down until Silva just couldn't take anymore. And then he started to kind of put it into second, third gear and really unloading with those heavier shots and those combinations that he does, where he's just in that close distance, dirty boxing distance, and he just starts, right? We saw that in this fight as well, when Royval and Van were close distance. But Brandon Royval, I was surprised because as I was watching this in real time, I remember thinking, as Joshua Van was closing distance, he kept pressing forward with that lead left leg, and he stands pretty straight up and down. And Brandon Royval is a guy that does have pretty good jiu-jitsu in his back pocket that he can implement pretty quick whenever he feels like it. Now, easier said than done. We know that Josh Van has good takedown defense. We saw that in the Ray Saruya fight. We've seen it in other fights as well. However, in a fight this close, I've said this before, you got to make sure you leave no box unchecked, no stone unturned. If you got other tricks in your bag, a deeper bag, and I think it's fair to say that Brandon Royval probably does have a little bit of a deeper bag than Joshua Van does. It's just what Van does is pretty dynamic, and sometimes that's going to, that's gonna surpass whatever tricks these guys can pull out at any given moment, right? But I was surprised with Van stepping forward with that lead left leg. I remember thinking, I was telling my buddy as we were watching it, man, that leg is just there to be just snatched. Now, it's one thing to snatch the leg, you got to get it to the ground. Does he finish it? Who knows, right? And we're never going to know now, right? But Brandon Royval is not just some straight up and down striker. We've seen him go to the ground. We've seen his dynamic ground game. We saw that in the Tetsuro Taira fight where they were on the ground, on the feet. It was just craziness, car crash of a fight. They're on the ground, they're on the feet, they're reversals, there's grappling exchanges, 50-50 positions, you name it. He's shown that he has a very, very capable ground game. And you would think if he was able to get him to the ground that maybe he's able to swing that round in his favor, maybe avoid some of those bigger shots. But no, what does he do? He stands toe-to-toe with him, and he gets caught off balance a little bit right when Josh Van lands that shot that dropped him. And, Royval did get up pretty quickly. It definitely stunned him. I'm not going to say it was a slip or anything like that, but he definitely, he knew it too. And I remember the commentating table saying like, oh, he knew it. He knew he just messed up by getting in that last wild exchange with him. You get into a firefight like that with Joshua Van and just the speed, the incredible speed and precision, you're not going to come out on the winning end of most of those exchanges. And that was really the story of this fight, right? While Brandon Royval did land some good shots, he landed some really good shots, actually. I remember in particular, I think there was a, I don't know if it was a knee that caught him and kind of bounced him back, but this was not just Brandon Royval just popping volume and just kind of staying in there. He landed some good shots too, to the point where I did feel like whoever was going to win round 3 was going to win the fight. But that last knockdown sealed the deal for Brandon Royval, and he knew it too. As soon as he got up to, he had some words for himself. I think it was a lot of frustration. But man, you would have had to think that as deep of a bag that Brandon Royval has, to not leave every box on, or to not check every box, and to not make sure every stone is unturned in this fight, to throw out everything, throw the kitchen sink at him with so much at stake, you got to be thinking he's kicking himself, or at least not trying some of those other things, right? And and maybe maybe Van still comes out on top. Who knows, right? I did think another piece that was interesting, and this doesn't get talked about a lot, is in-fight adjustments, or even the cornering advice from coaches. And sometimes, fighters just continue to do what they do. Matter of fact, a lot of them do. I've noticed it. It's one of the things that's kind of interesting. While I've seen coaches give very sound, practical advice for like, hey, this is what we're going to do. We need to stop doing this. We need to start going back to this. Sometimes, but then sometimes fighters are just like, yeah, man, what, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, kind of thing, right? But I thought it was interesting because Brandon Royval, his previous fight with Brandon Moreno, also a pretty close fight. I remember it was a fight going into the last round. I remember thinking kind of the same thing. Man, whoever takes this last round, I feel like is going to take it, right? And in his corner, he had Mark Montoya, who gave him fantastic advice and practical in-fight adjustments, which was interesting because I remember after that fight, Brandon was doing his media run and doing interviews and everything, and he spoke to the fact that he really needed Mark Montoya in that fight to kind of calm him down, to be like, hey, look, this is what we're going to do. You're in great shape. This is how we're going to win this fight. Didn't need to scream at him, didn't need to, cuss him out or, try to light a fire under him or anything like that. He just very calmly, hey, listen, we're good, we got this. This is what you're going to do. This is how you're going to win. You're going to go in and do it. And he did. And he got that victory. I'm not sure why Mark Montoya wasn't in his corner for this fight, but man, I kept thinking. I thought back to that moment where, man, Brandon Royval really could have used someone like Mark Montoya to just kind of calm the nerves a little bit, because after that just banger of a round two, I mean, both guys are just, foaming at the mouth, ready to, get back into each other. I don't think that was the best option for Brandon Royval, though. I think having a guy like Mark Montoya there in the corner to be like, hey, listen, we're getting a little too into a firefight, a little bit too much, and we need to start trying to implement some other pieces of our game, and we can maybe come away with this victory, because right now it's 1-1, right? He wasn't in his corner. I'm not sure why, but I remember thinking about that. And Brandon Royval talked about that in his interviews after the Moreno fight, about how it's his instinct to just want to go in there and just bang it out with these guys, and not sometimes think about game plan, not sometimes think about what the best path to victory is, right? Because it's his instinct to just go in there and just, hey, I'm going to meet you in the middle and let's just bang it out. And he mentioned that Mark Montoya is a guy that will kind of calm him down and be like, hey, no, hold on now. Let's not do that. Let's implement XYZ instead, right? Again, with all that being said, does that change the outcome of this fight? Maybe. Who knows, right? But as much as I watch these fights, as much as I notice these things, I had to kind of call that out in this video. Because going into that fight, going into that last round, I still kind of feel like, maybe a slight edge to Van, a little bit, but you kind of still felt like either guy could win, right? But that last knockdown just sealed the deal for him. Great win for Joshua Van. Fantastic win. He showed a lot of heart in that fight. Brandon Royval also has a tendency to kind of melt guys over the course of 3 to 5 rounds, but he wasn't able to. And Brandon Royval did land some pretty heavy shots, but it didn't fool Joshua Van at all. He knew he has full belief and confidence in his ability to mix it up with these. His speed is dynamic. His boxing is dynamic. His takedown defense up to this point has been dynamic. Now, when we're dealing with Alexandre Pantoja, that might be a little bit of a different story. But, none of those things I've mentioned before, because, we can get into any fight and talk about what guys could have done differently. Where was the coach? Where, why didn't he implement this? Why didn't he do this? Why, right? At the end of it, it might not have mattered, right? And that certainly doesn't take away from anything that Joshua Van proved to us in that fight. Because this was a big jump up in competition. It was. I mean, you're going from a Bulldog Silva, and all respect to him, he's not Brandon Royval. He's certainly not Alexandre Pantoja. He's a tough guy. He's a guy that will keep hanging around, and sometimes he'll pull off these wins from just, being the guy that kind of outlasts you. But this was a big step up in competition, and he showed that he belongs. He showed that, even if he loses to Pantoja, he's shown that he has the ability to compete now and win with these guys in the top 5. In the top 10, I guess, because the last guy he fought was, I can't remember, he was ranked 10 to 15, was Bruno Silva, but I'm not quite sure what he was at the time. But, after the fight, two fights, or excuse me, the following fight, which I love how that lined up, right? Because we had the number one contender fight, and then we had the Pantoja versus Kai Kara-France immediately after, which set up the in-ring face-off, which was great. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more because I am going to do another video about the Pantoja KKF fight. But you know, looking forward, looking ahead to Josh Van, I'm not going to get into too much about like how that potential matchup plays out yet. But I will say this: he has been on a rocket ship to the championship now. I mean, he is on a one-way path to a potential world championship in the flyweight division. Absolutely deserves it. He just beat the number one contender by the letter of the law. You are now the number one contender. You can get the next title shot, right? And after a fight like that, I mean, come on. I mean, it would have been one thing if he would, just kind of played it safe and just kind of, circled, popped the jab, used the speed to kind of, hey, I'm just going to get this victory, check this box, and save it for Pantoja. Man, he didn't do that. He said, no, I'm going all out. I'm leaving everything I have on the table here, and if I'm the last man standing, great. If not, at least I gave it everything I have, right? So man, you got to respect that from this guy. But few things that are a little concerning about Joshua Van's ascension. Is it deserved? 100%. Does he deserve the next title shot? 100%. You're not going to, hear me, being critical of that decision. I'm a little concerned that because of the flyweight division, how Pantoja has pretty much lapped now every contender. There's a couple guys still hanging out there that he hasn't fought yet. Well, actually, I say that, but I should say that it's been a while since he's fought. Manel Kape being one of them. They did fight quite a while ago. Pantoja got the decision over him. But he's still kind of, lurking out there, and he got on X and, he says what Manel Kape says. But because the flyweight division has been just so kind of top heavy, and Pantoja's now on his fourth title defense, or just finished his fourth title defense. He's got double wins over KKF. He's got double wins over Royval. He's got double or three or something like that against Brandon Moreno, right? He beat Steve Ursig. They're running out of guys, and so that's part of the reason why they've just sent him just soaring to this title shot. But you have to be a little concerned about how that potentially could play out for him. Could it be a 5-round banger back and forth fight? It could. Pantoja is an extremely talented and skilled fighter. And he is most likely going to be the favorite going into that fight. I worry, though, if Joshua Van loses that fight, and particularly loses pretty quick, he's going to want to get back in there quickly, right? He's going to want to, and I don't necessarily mean with Pantoja, but he's going to want to keep himself alive, relevant in the title picture, right? Being as young as he is, right? But if he loses, and if he loses pretty quick within the first 2 rounds, and this plays out kind of like how the KKF fight just played out, Pantoja marches forward, he gets in the close range, he formulates a takedown of some sort, works a submission, that's what he does. But he's also not afraid to mix it up with these, which is another thing I really respect and admire about Pantoja. I worry that if he loses in a similar fashion, I'm going to get back in there really quick. Hey, give me somebody quick, right? It's not necessarily a foregone conclusion that he's going to win that fight. And who knows who that might be against. But, guys, he did get knocked out pretty cleanly by Charles Johnson That is a thing that happened. And that's a little bit concerning for me because there are other guys now. Now you're in the top 5. There's other guys that can stand and bang with you. And, as close as this Royval fight was, you give him somebody like a Brandon Moreno, man, that's a tough test. That is a tough test. Certainly gave the champion Pantoja his toughest test, right, when he won the belt from him. But I'm worried that we might see something similar happen to Josh Van like we have just seen recently now with Steve Erceg. And while Steve Erceg gave just a great effort against Pantoja, pretty close fight actually, kind of similar thing. He loses, he's like, oh man, so close, I just almost arrived at immortality, the championship, right? The flyweight UFC champion. And when it's so close, man, okay, let me give me another guy, right? I'm going to beat him, and then I'm going to get right back in that title picture. And what happens? He gets quickly, pretty badly knocked out against KKF, right? And now it's like, now what's next for him? I mean, his path back to a championship is not looking great, at least for the foreseeable future. I just worry, as young as Joshua Van is, and how we've seen these things kind of derail guys' careers sometimes. I worry that trajectory for him might change because he's dynamic, but he's young. He's so young, and part of me wishes that they would have kind of ascended him a little more carefully, a little more slowly. Because again, even from a Bruno Silva to a Brandon Royval is a huge jump, right? Earned it 100%. Got no beef from me from that. And now with the championship, got no beef from me getting that opportunity. 100% deserves it. But there is a world where his fortunes could change very, very quickly, just like Steve Erceg's did. I'm not hoping for that. I'm not rooting for that by any means. It's great to see these young guys ascend and get some spotlight. And, the UFC is always looking to capture that younger audience. And, man, he's already got a crazy following on social media. He's forming a really strong fan base already. And so, everything he's getting, he absolutely deserves it. So we're going to see how it plays out, and we're not going to talk about that potential matchup right now between Pantoja and Van. But but I love the in-ring face-off between them. It was intense, but also respectful. It was fully welcomed by the champion Pantoja, and you gotta love that too. And this is the last thing I want to say. And because you're going to hear me repeat some of these things when I get into the Pantoja KKF fight, right? As far as what's next for Pantoja, well, it aligns with this video, right? Having Joshua Van now as the #1 contender, but Pantoja could have easily said, "No, I don't want him. I don't want him in the ring. This is my moment. 4 title defenses now. This is my moment. He had his moment. I want my moment now." He didn't do that. He said, "No, yeah, bring him in." A respectful face-off. He said, "Hey, this is a dangerous guy. He's a humble guy. He deserves the shot. Just be the #1 contender." And has just been raving about him as he's done his media rounds across, MMA, reporting and all the media outlets that have had him on for his interview. And so, you love that Bushido element, the respect between the two against these two very talented, martial artists. It is going to be a fascinating matchup. I'll have more to say about this later on once we get a little bit closer to that fight. Might even do another video this week, next week about this potential matchup, a deeper dive, a closer look at the X's and O's potential, how that matchup could play out for either guy, paths to victory and so forth. But yeah, it's hard to dislike either guy, right? And I'm going to tell you guys, I'm a huge Pantoja fan. I love his story. I love the fact that he's one of these guys that had to just dig himself up out of nowhere, right? He was just, I think it was as early as 2017, 2018, he was doing Uber Eats in Vegas to try to make money, right? To try to support his training, to try to, maintain. He's a guy that it's just a hard guy to dislike, right? And so, but he didn't have to do that. But he welcomed him in. They did the face-off, very intense, but again, respectful. I'm looking forward to that matchup. And you got to give Pantoja credit too. How many times have we seen these guys that are, especially these guys that are now, it's safe to say Pantoja is a kind of a long reigning champion. You can pencil him in for 2 title defenses, 2 title fights, a year. He's definitely pulling his weight and being an active champion. But how many times have we seen these guys, particularly guys that are like around his age, that have been these long reigning champions, these 35, 34-ish year old guys, when there's talk of a new hot up and coming contender, how many times have we heard those guys be like, he's a good fighter, but he's still got a little more to prove, right? He's a young guy, he's maybe he needs one more, right? You didn't hear a word of that from Pantoja. He said, no, he absolutely deserves it. He deserves it. He's here. He's the next guy. That's going to be a fun one. Got to tip your cap to Joshua Van in this one, though. He got it done with these. And while pretty one-dimensional, it's hard to argue that that's not a very, very functional path to victory for him. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time, MMA After Dark. Take care.